Right. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, blockchain antitrust. Our panel for today will be Thibault, Dr. Oki, and Sophie. Um, just before then, I'd like to give a few shout outs. We've got new sponsors. The Blockchain Society here at Cambridge. We are a student-run organization, and I'm the president. And we have Anne-Sophie, who's on the committee as well as legal expert. And we've also got Mihao here, who's an undergraduate computer scientist. Yeah, so Coin Bureau is our new gold sponsor. They're a really cool YouTube channel and market updates. They give out a really cool weekly newsletter. And Testnet Ventures actually is their venture arm. And if you want to talk to them, contact Johnny at Testnet Ventures. And Outlier Ventures, they are coming out with their new Polygon accelerator that we'll be working with them on. And more information coming soon. So subscribe to mailing list, join our Discord, all of those amazing things. There's also guests today from Simons, Muirhead and Burton, a law firm in London. And yeah, hope they're here already so they can see this.
No, they're just they've come on as the bronze sponsor. Simons, Muirhead.
Okay.
We just sorting out the paperwork, so they've committed to a bronze sponsorship.
Sweet. They're our sponsors now as well, guys. Congratulations, team. Wow. Why is that not working? Okay, sweet. Yeah, I'd like to introduce Thibault. Thibault's an associate professor of law at VU Amsterdam University and a faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center. He also has teaching positions at universities in Paris and an alumni of Harvard University, Berkman Center. He's also working with the World Economic Forum, and his new book, Blockchain Antitrust, which I forgot to put the cover off, is has it already been released, Thibault? Or
yes, I will put the link in my presentation, but it is out there. Yes.
Yeah, if you guys are interested after the talk, if you like the talk, make sure you purchase and read his book. Dr. Anne-Sophie. Anne-Sophie, she's an affiliate lecturer here at Cambridge. She teaches a course in digital assets and DLTs, and she had a PhD from Cambridge and did a LLM from Columbia Law School. She is also on the committee of the Blockchain Society as legal expert. So if you want to talk, if you're a Cambridge student and want to talk about some law stuff, talk to her. She's also working on a brand new startup with one of the previous presidents of the Blockchain Society here at Open Origins. She's the head of legal there, and yeah, visit their website. Dr. Oki. Dr. Oki teaches competition law here at Cambridge. He had his PhD from Oxford, and he actually studied at Cambridge for his undergraduate at Sydney Sussex College. What's really cool is he was also awarded a British Academy Mid-Career Fellowship for conducting research into competition law for NHS in the UK. So I'm really excited. Finally, if join the Discord, guys. So if you want to talk to Cambridge students, if you're a Cambridge student, just want to talk to other blockchain enthusiasts, or if you're a lawyer who's really interested in crypto regulation or just want to talk to loads of other people and the committee, join, send me a message, send me a message, send Tim a message. Yeah, that's it. And I'll pass it on to Thibault and we can start today's event. Thanks, guys.
Yes, thanks very much for the kind introduction. And we've been talking about organizing this event for quite some time, so I'm very excited actually. Especially to share the panel with two scholars that I admire. I'm very much looking forward to the end of my talk, so I can actually hear from what they have to say and open a discussion with them. As I was telling you, I will be asking you a question, so please be ready to use your smartphone or computer to vote, because this will change the course of my presentation, and I'm curious to see what you will answer. So I'm just going to share my screen with you, and you could see that I will be first introducing why I think we do need a cooperation between blockchain and antitrust, and there I will take, hopefully within 5 minutes, the opportunity to just explain very briefly what is competition law, or antitrust as people say in the US, and what is blockchain. So now, of course, if you know one of the two, you know that we could spend, several PhDs and probably several lifetime exploring the two. So it won't be too exhaustive, but I just want to make a point that they actually reach the same objective. And then you will be voting, and then depending on your vote, I will be exploring this path over here or the second one here down below. So this is a bit of what I want to do in 20 minutes or so. And so without further ado, so indeed, I just published a book. You can, of course, if you want, buy the book, the paper version of it, but it's also freely accessible online. And so I've put the link to the QR code and the link to the book. I'm also more than happy to share my presentation if you want, so you can access everything. So that being said, I thought, it would be funny, and this is probably just making me laugh and not anyone else in the world, but I think it is actually funny. It was actually funny for me to start a book about blockchain, which of course, is about the technology and something which looks like the future, saying it's nothing new. And this is how I start the book. And here, what I'm referring to is not that blockchain is not necessarily something new, although we could be discussing the pedigree of blockchain and all the tech combined within this one. But what is new is the relationship between law and technology. And actually, the oldest regulation of technology that I was able to identify is the one that appears on the screen right now, the Code of Hammurabi, in which the negligent opening of a canal was regulated and compensation was awarded in case you were overflowing the field of your neighbor. So this is the state of the relationship between law and tech. For almost 4,000 years, we've been doing it in a way to create a confrontation between the two, which I will explore in a minute. But basically, the idea is that if tech is used for bad purposes, or if the tech is creating bad outcomes, then they should be regulated without necessarily trying to preserve the actual technology. And so this leads me to exploring blockchain and antitrust. And if you talk about one of the two, I think eventually you have to talk about decentralization. Now it's a concept that is being used all the time. I can say that I probably hear the word decentralization on a daily basis, and yet it's really hard to know what people are discussing when talking about decentralization. So what I thought I would be doing in the book early on is to give my definition of it, not that it should be the official definition of what is decentralization, but the one that I use in the book to explore blockchain and antitrust is the following. It's a dynamic and multi-level concept, which I will explain in just a minute, that, in my opinion, measures the autonomy that you may have in defining your own behaviors. So the reason why it is dynamic is because I think, and this is especially true for blockchain ecosystems, it's not enough to just take a picture of it and to say, this one is centralized, this one is decentralized. I think you can't say Bitcoin is whatever you feel, centralized or decentralized, and Ethereum is the opposite, and EOS is the opposite, et cetera, et cetera. It's important to understand that there is a movie, and that if you are indeed trying to foster decentralization, you should do that over time. And there are mechanisms for you to measure the evolution of an ecosystem and try to predict how the ecosystem will evolve. And the reason why I say it's multi-level is because it's important not to just talk about blockchain as if it was just one block, but to actually make a distinction between the tech, the governance, and the potential evolution of those different layers, which I will explore in, again, just a minute. So this is decentralization. And what I think is fair to say is that regardless of the objective that you want to assign to competition law, and if you are not involved in the space, I can tell you that this is something that is being discussed on a daily basis. So far, most people will agree to say that the objective has been to protect consumers, but there is a call to change the objective of competition law to take into account, welfare, the environment, and workers' rights, et cetera, et cetera. But I think regardless of what you are trying to achieve, I think most people would agree to say that you should protect the actual competitive process, because if that is not protected, then you cannot reach any of your objective. And this is what appears in the words of John Sherman, the US senator that actually drafted the Sherman Act. And This, I believe, is what you see in competition law such as it exists today. So here I refer to the actual Sherman Act, which is the act in the United States, but it's the same in Europe, it's the same in the UK. What you basically have with competition law is the prohibition of two practices. One, which is here section 1, are the practices when several companies come together and agree on their market behaviors. And that, I believe, is prohibited because for two main reasons. First, if they come together, it means that they are not free to behave the way they want, because they have to then agree on a price for the agreement, or they have to agree to share the market, and then they have to comply with this illegal agreement. And also by doing that, it prevents all the companies from behaving freely out there on the market because they have to align and to follow the same practices, et cetera, et cetera. The other type of practice that you have are, as they say in the United States, monopolization, or as we say in Europe, abuses of dominance, in which you do have one powerful company abusing its market power. And again, I think it is prohibited because the logic is that if one company can do so, then it prevents all the companies from being able to just compete freely out there and, to win market shares if they have a better product or a cheaper product, et cetera, et cetera. And so that in turn means that competition law is here to protect the competitive process, or to put it differently, to free economic transactions from those coercions, being collusions or abuses of dominance, or to put it differently, to decentralize, at least to ensure that the actual competitive process is being decentralized and that any company can actually behave freely on the market. So that is competition law. Now, if we look at blockchain, I think it's fair to say that you see pretty much the same logic. And when I said that blockchain was multi-level, this is what I refer to. So I don't really have the time to explore all that. But as we know, blockchain is, working on top of the internet, which itself is working on top of the real space, with actual tubes, going down the sea. But what you see is that there is a core software, which is being used according to certain rules and certain consensus. And using this software, you have miners and core developers and participants, and they create the governance of the blockchain. And on top of that, you do have blockchain application, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that, as you may have heard, blockchain may get rid of the middlemen, or actually get rid of the middlemen such as we know them, may recreate a few others. But the idea is that it will actually free transactions from possible coercion. And here, the coercion that we talk about, for the most part, is the technical coercion. So if you buy Bitcoin, no one can actually prevent you from doing so, right? Which is something new. There is no bank in the middle. If you own Bitcoin or any other token, no one can actually take it away from your wallet. So this is pretty much the logic of blockchain. So what you see is that for both blockchain and competition law, what is okay, if not encourage, is our centralized outcomes. So if you are the best companies and you design the best smartphone, then it's perfectly fine for you to capture the markets and have the most consumers. The same is true for blockchain. If you have the best layer 1 blockchain, or if you have the best application running on top of blockchain to do whatever you want to do, then it's perfectly fine if everyone chooses to use your service or product. However, the process, the means for competition law should be decentralized, in a sense that it should be possible for someone else to come out there on the market and to compete with you. So here we do have the same logic. So it seems that blockchain and competition law are a match in heaven, but I think it's actually a bit more complex than that. And this is what, as a lawyer, you are tempted to study first. And this is certainly what I've done, where you try to study, when things are not going as they should. And where you may see that are in those situations listed here on the screen. It might be that blockchain is used to infringe antitrust. I will explain how this could be done, whether it is within the actual blockchain ecosystem or in the real space. And as we know, blockchain has anti-system roots. It came from the cypherpunk, and before that from the DIY movement, which is really much to the idea being to free people from institutions such as they exist. So it seems that creating a cooperation between a anti-system tech and the legal system is a bit awkward, to say the least. On the other end, what you also see is that, when talking about the law, of course, it's not always the case, but you may talk about it, enforcement, and punishments and potentially financial sanctions and jails, etc., which I believe will create some tensions with blockchain communities. And as I will explain, of course, the more centralized is a technology or ecosystem, the easier it is then to apply the law. If you try to apply antitrust to a pure public permissionless blockchain, then it's really hard to know where to go and how to enforce the law in the first place. So we do have those tensions between blockchain and competition law. And that leads me to believe that there are two possible paths for the future of the interactions between the two. One, we could create a confrontation, which is, again, what we've been always doing pretty much when it comes to law and tech, which means for lawyers that you actually do not team up with the actual technology and the people designing it, and that you design the legal system and enforce the legal rules in a way not to necessarily preserve the tech. It might be that you preserve the tech, but this is at least not the objective. For computer scientists, it would mean here that you do not team up with legal institutions and you design the tech not in a way to ease legal enforcement if necessary. If, on the contrary, you think that cooperation is a good idea, then what you try to do is to actually design the legal rules in a way to preserve the actual technology while, of course, addressing the issues. And for computer scientists, it means that you must create basically an entry door so that legal enforcement will be easier and that you will avoid the extreme measures such as shutting down the internet or the Chinese way, which is to say Bitcoin is prohibited, etc., etc. So to be perfectly transparent, and as you may know, because you've probably seen the title of this talk, I'm totally in favor of cooperation, but I thought that I will be asking you to vote and to tell me which one you think is best. Should we try to create a confrontation between the two and assume that they are different in nature, or should we try to merge the two, although they will keep distinct identities? And so for you to vote and to answer the following question, should we actively pursue cooperation between blockchain and antitrust? You have two different ways. You could go to slido.com, and then on the front page, they will be asking you for a hashtag. And I've put here the hashtag Cambridge. So if you just enter that, then it would lead you to the question. Or you could simply take a picture of that QR code on the screen. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to wait 1 minute for you to vote. And then again, depending on what you would say to me, I will then choosing one path or the other. And I could see that already it's always the same pattern. I will explain that in a minute when I will reveal the result of the vote. While I wait, instead of just being silent, I thought that I will be just mentioning something which I've done just for the sake of it, not really much for any other reasons, is that I've decided to sell as an NFT, which I'm sure you know what it is if you are involved in the blockchain ecosystem. If not, check it out. If you are lawyers and have never heard of it, you will be fascinated. So I'm trying to sell the cover of the book as an NFT, just to for the sake of it and to see if it works. So if you are interested in that, feel free to take a picture of the QR code here and to make an offer. But this was just an excuse for me to wait a little bit. Lots of votes already, so thank you very much for voting. And what I thought I would be doing is that I will be showing you the result of the vote. Otherwise, I know that you won't believe me, especially if the outcome is that cooperation is a good idea. So to be very clear, you indeed have decided by a big margin, 81% of you think that cooperation is a good idea. And the pattern that I see, but please keep that for yourself, is that the very first answer is always negative. So I think it's always someone trying to troll me a little bit. But it might also be that you do believe that cooperation is not a good idea, in which case I'm going to try to convince you that cooperation should be enacted between blockchain and competition law. So with that in mind, I will then explore the path, which is up here, and try to see what cooperation may look like. So of course, you makes me very happy by saying that cooperation is a good idea. You may be aware of that. And I'm also aware that you may have answered positively because of two biases. Namely, you basically, when you answer survey, try to please the person asking you the question, which in this case is me. So thank you very much for trying to please me. It might also be that you are answering yes to the questions being asked, which is a natural human tendency. So I'm not going to take it for granted, and I'm just going to try to convince you even more that cooperation is indeed a good idea. And so 2 points I want to make here, which is what I explore in the book. Point number one, which is what I said already, they pursue the same objective, which is to free transactions from coercion, being technical or economic, or to put it differently, to decentralize. That we've explored together already. But, and most importantly, perhaps, there are also great complements. So, it could have been that they were trying to achieve the same objective using the exact same ways. But I think that actually they do that in a way which is totally different. And that creates some even more synergies between the two. The very basic idea being that antitrust or competition law is made out of, the law such as we know it. For now, still written on a piece of paper. Maybe computational law is coming, but not yet. And blockchain is made out of code, regardless of the legal language, computing language being used. And that creates great complementary natures. If I explore that a little bit from the perspective of blockchain communities, I think it has become very clear in the last few months that legal rules could actually benefit blockchain communities. It might be that you are, part of a blockchain ecosystem and that you are trying to defend yourself against cartels, whether they come from the ecosystems. It could be that core developers are colluding with miners, or from the outside. And it might be that you are trying to defend yourself against monopolization. So again, someone abusing its market power against you. And by the way, I'm surprised to see that there is still no case in which some blockchain developers will sue some of the big tech companies from saying, if you try to advertise a blockchain product or service on a big tech platforms, then most likely we will be taking down your advertisement strategy. They say it's for security reason, and it might be, but it might also be that they are just trying to, outcompete blockchain this way using their infrastructure. So in any case, this is something that you may want to do. From the perspective of policymakers or antitrust communities, what we know is that we detect very few of the infringements to competition law. There are some empirical work. I could give you some number if you want, but basically, long story short, if you infringe competition law, most likely you'll be fine. No one will ever see that, and you could get a free pass. And sometimes it might be that the jurisdictions are unfriendly, and that it might be really hard for you, even though you may be rightfully asking for your rights to be enforced, to go to a Chinese court and to say, please enforce my contract. It might be very complex. And with smart contract, it might be actually easier for you to do so. And what you see at the substance level is that by removing the intermediaries in the ecosystems, blockchain is removing all the practices that comes with those intermediaries, which is also in the interest of antitrust agencies. So this is on the plus side, but there are indeed some tensions between the two. And I think it's very important to address those and not to say cooperation is great, end of the story, because otherwise it won't end up well. And this is where the 20% of you may actually be right, that cooperation is not a good idea. To make it very concrete, you may see antitrust infringements within blockchain ecosystems, or blockchain being used to infringe competition law in the outside world. So you'll see in the book that I explore how you could create a great collusion, unfortunately, using smart contracts. The reason is because a smart contract will be triggered if the conditions are met. So you do not need to go before a court and to ask for an illegal agreement to be enforced, which it will never be. But here you know that the code will execute the term of your contract, which means that your collusions becomes cooperative, to talk about game theory. Which is not good news for you and me, but good news for the companies willing to organize cartels. The same could be said for monopolization, but I don't really have the time to explore that. And what you see already, and here I'm going to be very specific and going to give you 3 actual cases, is that antitrust law may be infringed within the blockchain ecosystem. The first one that appears here is the BitcoinTalk.org case versus Gallagher. The decision was already published in the United States by a court in Florida. Basically, a blockchain developers argued that by being kicked off of this forum, it became impossible for him to find great developers and therefore to put out there a new blockchain and to compete with Bitcoin. So it lost the case because it would have entailed, according to US antitrust law, to be able to prove that indeed it was impossible to find great developers without access to the forum, which of course is not true. But you see how potentially, this case could become stronger should we talk about a different forum or a different infrastructure. Case number 2, the decision was just published in March of this year, is Bitmain versus American Corp. Here, what happened is that one group of blockchain users, talking here about the Bitcoin ABC blockchain, forked the blockchain, which, if you're not familiar, is basically a duplication of the blockchain with new rules. But if the two communities do not agree on the new rules, then they split the blockchain in two and it becomes 2 blockchains. And the original group said, well, this is a collusion. This is you agreeing together to fork the blockchain and dividing the value of the original one. They lost the case, but I think this was a close call actually for this one. I'm more than happy to explore why. And the third, I believe, might be potentially the most important private litigation in the field of competition law, at least if you just look at the numbers. What happened is that allegedly the creator of this blockchain, Tether, actually said that the token was backed with the US dollar, meaning 1 Tether equal 1 US dollar, when in fact it wasn't true. That we know for a fact. And what they were able to do is to actually put a lot of Tether into their wallets and to use those to buy Bitcoin at a very cheap value. But eventually this was seen, and the Bitcoin value dropped in a month by almost $600 million. And now they are actually suing those developers saying, well, you created a bubble, it exploded, and I'm now asking for compensation. And in the US, you can ask for 3 times the amount of the damage that you suffered. This is called the treble damages. So they are basically asking for 1.4 trillion US dollar in compensation. They dropped some of the claims in late September, but now antitrust is pretty much at the very center of the entire litigation. So you see mutual aggressions between the two. And this leads me in just 2 minutes or so to explore then how should we enact cooperation? If indeed cooperation is a good idea, but we see tensions between the two, then what should we do? So I think the basic idea of the book, and this is part 3 of the book, is to say, well, we should address those mutual aggressions, because if we do not, then it will create some tensions and cooperation will not be enacted. But we should do it in a way to preserve both the ability to apply the law and 2, blockchain as a decentralized ecosystem without the temptation of just re-centralizing blockchain, because it is then much easier to regulate it and to foresee all the transactions within the ecosystems. And so that leads me to the following title of the book. And I can tell you that it was quite a challenge to have the editor to agree with the title, because apparently it is not good for you to use a plus for Google queries. But this was central. And the idea being here to combine the two and to find solutions in the tech to actually help with legal enforcements and vice versa. So to be very concrete, and I don't really have the time to explore the history of law and tech, but I think that what we've seen, and here I'm leaving this field of competition law and I'm leaving the field of blockchain necessarily. It could be quantum computing or AI or any other tech. And this is actually a game that you can play online. If you want the link, I'll put it in the chat. Is that what we've seen is the garage strategy has been adopted, meaning that they, generally speaking, cooperate. When there is a new tech, there is no legal enforcements necessarily coming after it. But if you see that the tech is being used to cheat on legal rules, then it creates some tensions, and then you see no cooperation anymore. And then it's really hard to recreate the means for cooperations. And if you take a step back, what you see is that, of course, competition law enforcers will go after the big tech companies because they are not trying to reach the same objective. So it is very natural that there is a confrontation. But I think, again, it might be different for blockchain and competition law. So to be very specific, I think on the side of public institutions, there are several things to be done. First, enforce the law in a way to protect the ecosystem, right? So this is the practice that I gave you, the big tech versus blockchain. It might be also, blockchain related companies. You may see exchanges saying tomorrow, well, we're going to agree that if you want to exchange a token into pounds, then you're going to have to pay a 10% cut. If they were all to say that 10% is the new rule, then you will have an antitrust issue. And I think this is where to focus enforcement. And it might also be that if you enforce the law within blockchain, you may want to do it in a way to preserve blockchain differentiation from other ecosystems. So if you do say, you know what, I don't like this idea of decentralization, let's get rid of it, let's prohibit forks because there are collusions, etc., then what you end up doing is re-centralizing blockchain. And then I see no reason why anyone would use a centralized blockchain, whatever it means, instead of just using a regular database or company. So those are a few of the proposals that I make in the book. I explore how this won't be easy because you do have trade-offs between different objectives. So again, feel free to explore chapter 13. And it might be also that we want to create comfort zones. And again, the European Commission is taking that road, which is, I think, excellent. And I think it's fair to say that the UK has been leading the pack when it comes to creating, safe harbors and legal sandboxes and innovation hubs, etc. And something that worries me very much is regulatory capture, which is, this is already what you see in the space. And there is a case, by the way, exactly about that in Brazil, in which the big banks tried to say, if you are doing some blockchain-related activities, you won't be able to open a bank account with us. So there is an antitrust investigations against those banks right now. But now they are trying to go to the regulator and to pass regulation, which would be prohibiting blockchain developers from opening bank accounts. So this, I think, should be on high on the target list. But it also means that blockchain communities should actually ease legal enforcement. Namely, if you do have a smart contract and it is really immutable because it was designed without a possibility to enter it and to stop the smart contract, I could see why the regulator wouldn't be happy. And I think that this won't end up well because there are always ways to, stop a smart contract, which might be to shut down computers, to shut down internet for certain users. And I think we want to avoid that. And there are several ways to be tested. I've listed a few here on the screen, but I think they should be tested first in a lab, then with those sandboxes and safe harbors to try to see if blockchain communities are still willing to use the tech despite those new mechanisms being implemented to, get rid of transactions if necessary, stop smart contracts, etc. This is the subject of a report that I actually wrote for the European Commission. This was published at the end of last week. I've put the link to the QR code if you want to read that. And again, you won't find, decisive solutions, but at least I've tried my best to explore which solutions we should be testing in the future. So, long story short, this is just an overview of what you see in the space of big tech versus competition law. There are lots of cases, and I think that the same is coming when it comes to the blockchain ecosystems. And so for that reason, I think we should enact cooperation right now. Otherwise, it might be too late to do it in the future, especially if you consider that blockchain is decentralized and distributed and that it might be really hard to apply the law ex post. So my question is, do we have a deal? Did I manage to convince one person who voted no to my question or not? And if not, I'm more than happy to discuss and to hear the reason why you think cooperation is a bad idea. The very last thing that I want to say is that you can access the book, but I think we should also try to think about how to foster this idea of law plus technology outside of competition law and outside of blockchain to try to see how to combine the two so that we can improve the common good. So should you be interested, I have no idea what I would do with this mailing list, but you could just put your name and maybe I'll get in touch with you if we can do something together. So thank you very much. And again, very much looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Thibault. That was very insightful. I'll pass it on to Dr. Oki, who will take over and have a conversation with Thibault.
So this is all fantastic, really fantastic stuff, Thibault. So I guess my first question, or perhaps in competition law, the most interesting aspect or the most challenging aspect is to think about whether blockchain creates a problem that competition law or antitrust cannot deal with. So is there something about blockchain that is creating something that competition law cannot deal with it? Because if blockchain is a normal thing and you can just normally apply competition law to it. Although it's new, it's not so exciting because there's new technology, new markets, new industries, and you just apply your law from 1890. It can deal with all problems. So my first question really is competition law creating a problem that, is blockchain creating a problem that competition law cannot deal with? Or is it more like the big tech where you're seeing a lot of excitement, where you have to change your understanding of what you've previously been doing? So we can carry on applying our competition law in a normal way, but you've got to think about in this new environment how we apply it and what it means to apply it, particularly perhaps say in big tech. Normal things are happening, but they need to happen quickly because markets move quickly, for example. So I wonder if we could think about these things in that way. And you're saying it's multi-layered. And in this multi-layered relationship, I'm thinking about is blockchain creating a problem where within the layer and the ecosystems are the problem. And perhaps we can focus on this idea when you're creating a blockchain, where are the problems? So if blockchain is permissioned, if someone is selecting who is entitled to validate the chain, then our concern from the competition perspective probably is with asymmetry in power between those who are validating and those who are merely using. Do the validators have an advantage on the market because they are validators? Are validators and third parties treated in the same way? For example, in any limitations on how the blockchain is used. So perhaps this is my first question back to you, Thibault. Where are the problems when you are creating the blockchain?
Sure, I'm gonna. I mean, those, I know it's the thing to say always. It's thank you very much for the question, but I think they really are fascinating questions, and I got obsessed with those, with the subject of blockchain and competition for this type of questions. The very first paper that I wrote was entitled, "Is blockchain the death of antitrust?" And generally speaking, I can tell you the trick if you ask a question is to answer by the negative in your paper. But I actually done the opposite. I answered by using the positive and saying, yes, it is. And I think it is not because we won't be able to apply competition law within the ecosystem, but I think it is because you do need regulation to create an entry door, and then you can apply competition law. And that, I believe, will actually change and shift the focus and our attention to the regulatory side of it, and not just at competition law. And I think for that reason, and I made a parallel with jazz music, which I have to say I love, but I think jazz music is dead because it's not actually the subject of conversations in our society. And I believe that with blockchain, the same might be true actually for competition law. It won't be the actual center of our conversations because regulation is going to be at the very center, and the way to actually enable the law, which if you followed the debate between Lessig and Easterbrook, I think gave the last word actually when it comes to blockchain to Lessig. Yes, you do need regulations to enter the cyberspace and here blockchain so that we can then apply the law such as we know it. So to answer the first part of your question, it means that we do have new problems, I think. Those are not the problems that we've encountered with any of the other technology. If I go back to my smart contract example, if the smart contract is immutable, it means that even though you may, and this is hard, find who is the person behind the smart contract, what's the meaning of the smart contract, is it anti-competitive? Let's say you find a way to say that it is, it still might be impossible for you to stop the smart contract, which if I put that, in the analog world, meaning that you have someone stabbing people in the street, you can identify the person, spot the practice, and yet there is nothing you can do. And that, again, I think is a fascinating, thing to think about when it comes to legal enforcement. And it might mean that, again, we need regulation as an entry door, but I'm a bit worried that the easy solution would be to say, well, let's then change the entire code of blockchain and the entire design. I'm not sure if I trust anyone to actually do that on his or her own. And this is why I propose to potentially impact the code but in a way not to shape legal behaviors before they happen, which makes me think about the movie Minority Report, which ends poorly. But on the contrary, to say we're going to find a way to apply the law after the practice are being implemented if necessary. So this is part one of my answer. And part two, where are the problems? I've put here everywhere. I think they are at the layer 2 or at the application layer, right? So if you design a application running on top of a blockchain, you may see, tying and all the practices that we know only too well. But, and this might be new, they are also at the layer 1 level. And so you gave the example of, a permission blockchain, it could be a private blockchain. I could see how we may see refusal to deals if accessing a private blockchain is necessary for you to be able to compete out there. Not to get access might be a competition law issue. And that is something which is new and not something that we have seen when we just talk about the internet, right? We never talk about the competition law issue at the actual, protocol layer of the actual internet. And yet this might be something central when it comes to blockchain, because you do have those layers and the characteristics of the layer 1 of the blockchain will actually impact all of the other layers on top of it. So it might be that eventually the issues will come back to impacting the layer 1. Otherwise, you could just fix the issues if possible, but not in a long-lasting way. So I do hope that I answer your question. And I look forward to the next one.
So now
you want to come back to the jazz music thing? I can feel it.
We always just write down here the complete works of John Coltrane. Complete works. We can't talk about it though, because you're telling me it's not the subject of any conversation. So we're talking now. We've got the risk to, but we've also got the risk from. So some of the discussion occurring is, what risk does blockchain pose to things going on in the world, the good things? But at the same time, you're also speaking about, and particularly some of your concluding proposals, about what risk is there to blockchain from the world. And I wonder if you can separate these out. Which are the greater risks? Is this like the initial idea of the internet? The internet was great and it essentially needed to be free and unregulated. After a while, maybe it's not so great, but it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle. Are you now in this position to say, blockchain is great, it needs to be promoted, it needs to flourish, we need to intervene to make sure this can happen? And are you then alive, and are we sufficiently alive to the downside of the technology that we're promoting and creating?
So prediction is hard, especially when it's about the future. So again, if you are watching this talk in just 20 years from now, it may have been very much that, blockchain was just a total disaster. This is a possibility, but it's really hard for me to know exactly how this could become a disaster. I think, just to look at the recent history of the space, I think 3-4 years ago, people were saying, well, public permissionless blockchain won't work because people want to have clear governance and it won't work. And I think that now I see kind of the opposite, movement in which people say, well, private blockchain is not that different from a firm. You do have a clear pilot in the cockpit, and therefore, why should you go for a private blockchain instead of just a regular firm? So it's, you see movements, and it's really hard to know where the entire ecosystem is going. But something that I can tell you is that when writing a paper that I published last year with Vitalik Buterin from the Ethereum Foundation, I was very pleased to see that he was actually willing to work with lawyers. And what he was telling me is that we do not want blockchain to be Uberized, not in the sense of creating the sharing economy, but in a sense of you putting a service out there on the market and then being told, by the way, the business model is illegal and you should actually, retract the product or service. And so most people, I think, in the ecosystems are willing to work with regulators and policymakers. And what I see, not in all countries, but certainly in Europe, is that the regulators are also willing to learn the actual technology and to try to impact it in the positive way, which is not something that I see in the AI space, but luckily I see that in the blockchain space. So to answer your question, I'm not sure which one is the most important, the risk from created by blockchain or the risk to the blockchain ecosystem and what may be coming to it. But I do hope that indeed we could stop the gimmick of saying we are technologically neutral, because and this is debate in the space of law and tech is do we see neutrality in the technology, or can we say that some technologies are by design better than others? I do believe that, but you may disagree. But I think we should actually try to protect the actual technology for the reasons that I've explained, instead of just saying I'm going to be neutral and we're going to see what's happening. So those are my concerns, but I'm aware that those are concerns for just the next coming years. And I'm aware that it's hard to ask agencies to actually keep a long-term vision, because of course, when you have a case and you have to, sanction the practice because the practice was anti-competitive, it's hard to say, well, I'm not going to do it, or I'm going to do it in a way that is good for the future and the long-term vision of the space. And yet, I think this is somehow necessary. So this is the reason why I've tried to write this book, although there are just a few cases out there. I haven't explored them all in the presentation, but there are just a few more. But because I think, again, it's important to shape the ecosystem now before we create a confrontation, because I'm convinced that blockchain might be a bad solution. We'll know in the future. But I think I know, at least for me, my conviction is that if we create a confrontation, then it won't achieve what blockchain could be achieving. It's not even a fair shot at even trying to achieve the positive thing for society. So, it's a mix of hope and trying to be a realist and, come up with very concrete solutions. But that's the best I can do. And I'd be more than happy to talk about John Coltrane still.
Oh, thanks, Oki, and I'll pass it on to Anne-Sophie now.
So, okay, I understand you may have many more of these fascinating questions to ask, and this could go on for much, much, much longer. Combining these two interesting topics, it's just endless list of interesting questions. I know we're running slightly over already, so instead of me just adding 2 more comments, I would suggest we go straight to Marco's question. In the meantime, if anybody else on the either on the panel or more likely the audience has any questions, please feel free to either DM them to Taran or put them in the chat for everyone. So it's okay for everybody. Just want to make it a little bit more interactive now and just go to Marcus's question. So Marcus, let me just read out your question for those who haven't seen it. So Marcus was asking a question to Thibault. Among the limitations of competition law that you mentioned, would you include your theory of granularity, namely exploring if there are identifiable undertakings colluding? Thibault, do you have an answer to the question, or do you want to?
Yes, I was trying to avoid this one.
Didn't work.
Because it's I think it requires quite some time. To make it very short, competition law, and we do have and I generally believe in what I'm about to say, and I mean it. I think we have the world expert when it comes to those questions here with us, and that's Oki. So I'm going to try my best not to make a fool of myself. But when it comes to corporate law and what is a firm for the purpose of competition law, I think it's fair to say that we still rely on the theory of the firm, such as explored by Ronald Coase, which is a zone of vertical control, right? And if you're not familiar with the field of competition law, I'm gonna tell you that you may have 2 firms for the purpose of corporate law, and yet if one controls the other because it has 100% of the shares or a great deal of influence, they will be deemed to be the same firm for the purpose of competition law, with all the implications that it has. And again, it relates to this idea of control, and more specifically, the power to command and control. So to say, you're going to do this, you're going to behave on the market this way, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that is gone when you talk especially about public permissionless blockchains. And I explore indeed in the book that you may be a core developer, which gives you the power to design the actual software. But if you try to force an update, you cannot. You need the approval of the miners and also the users, by the way, because if they leave the blockchain, then the blockchain is a value of 0. And the same is true for all the players in the ecosystems. They cannot impose decisions. They can nudge the people and influence the decisions, but that's about it. Meaning that the theory of the firm does not apply. You cannot say that Ethereum is a firm. You cannot say that Bitcoin is a firm. And so it means that if you have no firm, you have no subject, no legal entity to which apply the law. Of course, you can always apply the law to end users, you and me, and certain apps. But if you try to apply the law at the layer 1 blockchain, then you are stuck because you have no legal entity to which apply the law. And this is why indeed I explore in chapter 7 of the book how we could recreate a legal fiction, a legal entity, to capture the players who can actually influence the blockchain to a great deal. And I explore how to do that. I don't really have the time for that. But indeed, I would say this is challenge number 1 when it comes to competition law and blockchain, which is that you lose the subject to which you apply competition law, generally speaking, which again makes it absolutely fascinating, at least for me. But thank you very much for the question nonetheless.
Marcus, I hope that answered your question. I mean, it's a mere answer to a potentially very, very long follow-up discussion. I really enjoy the fact that there are different points of view, that we have people answering your question with no and yes at the beginning. And I see Joachim Schweren isn't entirely convinced yet. And I wonder, Joachim, if you're willing to just elaborate a little bit on why you stick to your no.
Yeah.
If you're willing.
Thanks for asking. Indeed, it's a very tough one. And I have to say that I've been working on competition cases from the side of the Commission for 20 years now, less now, but more in the past. I've seen all the waves in tech coming with, first of all, Microsoft, Intel, and then the big techs and everything that you've mentioned. And I am normally absolutely in favor of cooperation and think that Thibault has excellent arguments that speak in favor of, I would say, his line of reasoning. So I'm not having a categorical no. But I have a number of issues here where I would like to put at least question marks and very briefly mention 3 of them. First is the speed of innovation. And I think that blockchain, what we are discussing here, is truly different from other fields of technology which we apply, because we have so much and so fast disruptive innovation that I find it very difficult at the moment. And it was a concern of myself actually a few years ago, I have to admit that we would see a third wave of, let's say, tech antitrust cases involving, for example, and of course we're not having these cases, so I'm just mentioning the names for the sake of clarity of argument, Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever. Just look at what the companies are doing, and if you can circumvent any potential problem by innovating or by getting around of that in the community, I think that's a different game than you have in traditional tech. The second element is the community part of that. I, as an economist, have learned at university that basically you start with atomistic competition and profit maximizing companies, and then you build a whole world of regulation and reasoning and competition law on top of that. That's absolutely not what we're talking in blockchain, at least from the origins, specifically when we look at the DeFi of NFT space. These are communities that simply have a completely different governance than traditional firms, and therefore I find it very difficult to apply straightforward competition law, be it on Article 101 or 102 in Europe, to that reasoning. The third thing which always strikes me most is actually the political economy behind that. We have global technologies here. So look at the already existing cases, Thibault, that you've mentioned. Is there any line of convergence? Well, there might be convergence, but any line of agreement between, for example, what we do in Europe, what different administrations do in the US, what they do in China or elsewhere on the world. This is difficult to conceive, especially because every one of these systems has other objectives from law or from economics or politics that come on top of that. There might be industrial policy considerations, competitive considerations. There might be other things that simply have to do with the way that governments or regulators want to have their society structured, which are not in line, and where competition law in the past has been abused a lot to push through certain decisions only because it was the desired outcome from top down. And this is not what we're talking about here. So I have a lot of question marks on this, which is simply for me the start of a discussion. And I'm absolutely not saying that there should be no cooperation, quite to the contrary, but I think this is just opening a lot of discussions where, I'm sorry to say that from an economic perspective, we always consider laws not as really something that is strict, but as a price tag. A law is a price tag, you see? So at the end of the day, you can do it or not, you pay a price. At the end of the day, the price might be legitimate because you have certain objectives. But I see neither a technological nor a political nor any other reason for the moment why, in fact, we should be using traditional competition law for the blockchain space, because simply we are talking about completely different setup than in other technologies. Sorry to be slightly heretic, especially that you've said so many positive things about the European Commission. These are my personal thoughts, of course, not anything that the Commission is doing. But being a regulator, in a sense, I'm certainly the most careful person when it comes to application of existing regulation to new technologies. That is not always a good idea.
Can I just say that, it's funny because I very much agree with all of your comments. And I think those are some of the main reasons why I think we should have cooperation in the space. And this is what I try to explore in the book. But just to mention the third one, I think we may indeed see a race to the bottom. And I see that, there is a big difference between the big tech companies or any companies, as a matter of fact, and blockchain, which is that if you do not have a clear pilot in the cockpit, it means that no one can actually say, well, you know what, we're going to design a version of Bitcoin for China and apply this actual design. We're going to do this actual version for Europe and this one for the US. And so it might be that if you try to regulate and impact the technology in a way which is very confrontational, you may have two effects, I think. One, it has no effect at all on the actual technology, which is a bit what we see with China and the ban on Bitcoin. Or if it has an effect, it actually changes the design for the entire world at once. And I think this is why we must have a sort of cooperation, and which means cooperation, at the global scale, which of course I realize is very complex. But I'd be more than happy to continue the conversation because those are points that I thought about and try to explore in the book. So, and again, I very much agree with you that those are the reasons why we should actually invest time in the space and try to understand what's happening. And the very last thing, and again, I very much agree, they are very different in nature from the firm. But something which is fascinating, especially with the NFT, is that what you see is that it aligns not perfectly, but it aligns value creation with value capture, right? So you create the thing, the piece of art, whatever that is, the art performance, and then you can actually capture the value of that, which is, of course, not at all what happens with the big tech companies. And so I think that, again, plays out in the interest of users and consumers, which is, as far as I know, the objective of competition law. So again, it seems to me that it goes in a direction which is similar. But I look forward to continuing the conversation in any case.
We have several more questions coming in, and I'm sure there's many more. Perhaps one, taking two questions together, perhaps. So Taran was asking about, sorry, just looking through the questions. Taran was asking about, they say a blockchain like Bitcoin, who are the main entities that have influence over it? And perhaps Bitcoin, maybe Bitcoin, Ethereum, the main blockchains. Perhaps our discussion so far has been about blockchains, but of course, depending on the application that we build on the blockchain, we maybe talk about very different things. We already mentioned DeFi's and NFTs. So talking about the blockchain as if it's one thing, there are many different types of blockchains, obviously many different use cases. It's not blockchain use in supply chains looks very different than an application like NFTs or DAOs, etc. But does it even make sense to think about main entities having an influence over blockchains? I know you talked in the book about miners. What does it matter how centralized miners are in a Bitcoin Ethereum blockchain? And then the related question perhaps is the one that Aditya asked about. If you think about, can we even have blockchain mergers? But if we can, or perhaps more likely, if you have mergers of entities or projects built on a blockchain, how would you look at an ex-ante analysis of that?
Yeah, so question number 2 is the other one I was trying to avoid. This is chapter 12 of the book, and this is by far the most technical one. I thought this won't be good for a talk, but I will try my best to answer. As for the first one, indeed, so this is something that I forgot to mention, which is that when you look at the layers, I think it's important when you study whether one layer is decentralized or not to see if that has an impact on the other layers. And sometimes the answer is positive, and sometimes it is not. So to be very concrete, I think it's not fair to say that a blockchain is centralized, because mining power might be indeed centralized, or you may see 30% of it or 40% in the mining pool somewhere. It means that this layer is not fully decentralized for sure, but I'm not sure that it means that the entire blockchain is actually not decentralized, because you may, of course, you have a great deal of power coming with the mining power, but there are lots of things that you cannot control and influence, and so therefore, in a sense, I'm not convinced that it means that the entire ecosystem is not decentralized and that it is not good anymore. And so I always try to keep that in mind, which is when we talk about entities, whatever it means, or legal fictions within the ecosystem, does it matter? And I think it matters if they can actually push the entire ecosystem and all the layers on top of it in a certain direction. To be very concrete, if you do have millions of followers on Twitters, if you study, the forums that are being used for the BIP, the actual core updates of the software, and you see that one person proposing an update is always approved, and that's, persons which are not the core developers will never get the update approved. That is something I think to be taken into consideration in competition law when you try to see where is control. And so I come up with a list of criteria, but what I can tell you is that it's going to be more complex than just in a firm in which you can always apply the same analysis in which you say, okay, CEO share orders, they can actually give orders, and that's it, and that's the legal structure. I think here it's going to be more granular because you're going to have to look at that, and those players for each blockchain, it might be different. It might be that in certain blockchain, if you are not a core developer, you can't even ask or propose a update to the software. And in some other, it's possible. So it's very important to do it at a granular level, which I realize is not ideal in terms of legal cost, but I think this is the price to pay for legal certainty and the accuracy of the law. This was question number one. Number two, as for merger control, there are different scenarios. One, which we've seen already being implemented, is a chain merger in which you will actually merge the history of two blockchains, the ledgers. There are questions as to what to do with the tokens, especially the token of the blockchain being acquired. There are mechanisms. You can burn the token, and I think there are ways for you to try to enact the merger in which you would say, if you give me your old token, then you get 1.2 of the new token. So it could create an incentive, which brings me to that again, which is the incentive to merge. Because again, this is not a firm, so it's not enough for one CEO to say, I'm going to merge with this other entity, because if you try to do so, but the users refuse the merger, then there is no merger at all, right? They would just fork the blockchain and recreate the things such as they wanted to. So I think to study the incentives for two blockchains to come together is again central, which means that you need to study the technical aspects, which technical incentives do you have? Which economic incentive do you have, et cetera, et cetera. So again, needs to be more granular. And I hope this might be a way that will push, agencies to be a bit more technical when it comes to merge control, because what we do so far is that we mainly look at the market shares and the turnovers, and we do not really consider the actual technology being acquired. We do it a bit in the market definition, but I think we could do it even more. And so maybe blockchain will be a way to bring those agencies to be a bit more technical here. I try to stay as broad as possible. I'm sorry for that. But again, chapter 12, it's open access. So feel free to explore this one.
I see Aditya have a quick follow-up question because we're running.
Yes, just to add to that. Am I audible?
If it's really quick, or perhaps afterwards, perhaps even better if you could ask a question to Dubois and perhaps follow up later. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah, is that okay? Just because I want to address the very last question very quickly. If that's all right.
Sure.
There's one more from Ritwik, which is a very important question, but I think also perhaps broader than the topic we're discussing today, which is about the international dimension of blockchain regulation. Of course, blockchains, as you just discussed, Thibaut, that there's not a blockchain for the EU and a blockchain for the US. Do you have any very, very brief comments about regulatory approach to something as potentially decentralized? We talk about permissionless systems as blockchains.
Is that the question?
The question was,
I can answer. No, please go ahead.
The question was, can a country regulate blockchain without an international consensus on such regulation? And second, can a blockchain net work with a patchwork of different regulatory requirements in different countries? I think you already answered part of the second question, which is you don't have a different blockchain per jurisdiction. And then the first question, can we regulate blockchain without an international consensus? I think we're already seeing that regulators are trying, and it doesn't mean that you cannot regulate certain applications being built or certain projects building on the blockchain. I'm not sure the question is, can we regulate a blockchain? Perhaps more relevant question would be, can we regulate what's built on top? But I just want to put the question to you. It's very broad, but I know we're running out of time, and it's not on competition law.
So it's important again to make a distinction always between what's happening within the ecosystem, and generally speaking, it leads you to study the actual design. This is one thing. And of course, you can regulate that. I'm not sure if it will have any impact, but it's possible. And then you have the outside the ecosystem, and it may have actually an impact on what's happening within the ecosystem. So in Europe, we have two regulations, MiCA and MiFID II. One is soon coming. And so they would say that if you want to exchange your tokens, you need to go through an exchange that will actually ask you for your real life identity. And that, of course, may actually impact what you do within the blockchain. If you know that you finance illegal activities and eventually you will have to provide your passport, potentially creates an incentive for you not to do so in the first place. So there are things that are possible for countries. It might be that you regulate, a bit of what's outside of it. But when it comes to the actual design of a blockchain, the core software, there is no one where you could go to and just say, that's what you're going to do. And if you go and discuss with the core developers, let's say of Bitcoin, we know where they are. They are hosted by the MIT Media Lab. So if you ever go there on the third floor and talk with those people, they will tell you, you have a good idea. But the problem is that if we implement the change such as you propose, then we get control. And control is equal to liability. Therefore, we are not going to do that because we do not want to have any governments on our back of our shoulders saying this is what you should do. And if not, you're going to be liable. But because we live in the rule of law system, if you have no control over something, then you won't be liable. It doesn't make any sense, right? To punish me for someone doing something illegal in China right now. And so they have understood that very well. And therefore, they are trying not to take control over the actual blockchain. You may see variations of that. What I said is certainly true for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Stellar, and Polkadot, and a few others. But it might be that tomorrow you're going to see a very successful blockchain in which the core developers will be able to impose changes. This is, something which is a possibility. So there are things you could do as a country, but international cooperation is going to come handy when it comes to the actual impact of the actual tech itself and not the things happening around it. Again, I'm a bit broad because,
very broad question. I know it's much beyond competition law. And I think we see much of that discussion already in DeFi, where we see core developers trying to say we're not in control of this DeFi project just to escape liability, which also means if things go wrong and there's a bug or an exploit, it makes it harder because nobody's in control to actually do something about it. So in the end, it doesn't necessarily protect users.
That is certainly true, and this is something that I explore in chapter 1 of the book, in which I say, and I put that in the form of a story. It's someone waking up in a van in California, and this is a real story, and he realizes that there is a bug in Bitcoin. This was just 2 years ago, and that you can actually exploit that and double spend any Bitcoin that you have, which basically means that if this information goes public, the value of Bitcoin becomes zero. If you could just spend, the same Bitcoin over and over again. And it's very interesting to see what this person has done and how to actually implement a patch to fix the bug as soon as possible. And this is where you see, in case of urgency, where control lies. It's not control, again, in the sense of command and control, but it's interesting to see who he actually gave a phone call to and what they have done and how they have used the forum. And actually within less than 24 hours, they've actually implemented a patch to this bug. So, this might be the kind of situation in which you see that, well, no control is a beautiful story, but, somehow it might be possible for you to kind of influence the ecosystem, to say the least.
And then perhaps competition law, antitrust law comes back into place. Clearly, so many more questions to address, but thank you so much, Thibault, for making time in your book tour, your busy book tour for us tonight. And thank you so much, Oke, for your willingness to have the bigger zoom out and raise some bigger picture questions about blockchain technology and the aims of competition law and how they interact. So thank you so much, both of you, for taking your time to be with us today. And I'm sure we can continue the conversation elsewhere. Make sure we read your book, Thibault, and get all the answers that we didn't have time for tonight. Taran, I'm not sure if you want to say a final word on perhaps the next Cambridge CBS event. No, we lost Taran. Sorry, Taran, do you want to make an announcement for the next CBS event?
Sorry, my Wi-Fi is really bad. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Thanks everyone for coming. Thanks, Thibault, Dr. Oke, and thank you, Anne-Sophie. Thank you so much. I hope you guys like this, and the recording will be uploaded, and I'll send it out on the mailing list. Maybe if I have your permission, I could also upload it to the YouTube channel. Who knows? I'll send out an email. But thanks everyone for coming. And yeah, see you guys around.
What you have to do, Darren, is cut out any discussion about jazz because Thibault knows. We have been in trouble before.
Yeah. No, but
Yeah.
thanks a lot. I'm putting my email in the chat if you want to reach out to me. And yeah, it was a lovely event. And thank you very much, Taryn, for organizing all that.
And let us know how the NFT sale goes. If you're making your millions on your NFT book cover.
I will let you know. Yeah. Thank you very much.